Okay, this video is about biblical and common sense eschatology. Now, I sent out an email of late requesting questions or topics that people would like to hear because when the student's ready, the teacher is available. The teachers I've learned in life are the best 6 teachers are who, what, when, where, why, and how. Those are the best teachers. So we're going to look at biblical and common sense eschatology. Eschatology means it's a part of theology concerning the final events of history of the world or of mankind. So it deals with end times. And so what I did is I got online and I found 3 different articles or viewpoints that describe or summarize the 3 different ideas about eschatology. That way, I get it straight from either the source or what this party is thinking. Okay, and so, I have no desire to misrepresent a position, even if that position's wrong. And often, if you discuss this with somebody, remember to get in the habit to establish the definition of a word and ask the party what they mean by the word. Okay, now there are 3 different ideas about eschatology. One article says 4, but what they're doing is dividing one into 2 different camps. And a word that comes up is millennium. You have one viewpoint, premillennium. That means Jesus Christ comes back at the beginning of the millennium. The other view is post-millennium, and that means Jesus Christ comes back after the millennium. And then one is millennium, and I don't think they really know what they believe. Now, the word millennium, the mill at the beginning means 1,000. I think it's out of Latin. And the annual year, so it's 1,000 years. Hence, you have what? The millennials. Okay, and where this comes from in the Bible, where this stems from, and this is where these 3 different ideas will begin here in Revelation chapter 20. If you look in verse 2, you'll see 1,000 years. In verse 3, in the middle of the verse, or maybe about 57.5% through it, you'll see the 1,000 years. And in verse 4, you see the last 3 words, 1,000 years. In verse 5, about the middle of the verse, maybe about 62.3% in, is the 1,000 years. Verse 6, the last 3 words, 1,000 years. And then verse 7, word number 3, 4, and 5, the 1,000 years. Okay, so that's the springboard. All 3 of these viewpoints are stemming from. And so we'll take a little bit of time and look at these 3 different viewpoints. Now, often, maybe a person doesn't know what's right. Okay, and so what you do is you start with the obvious wrong. Okay, you start with the obvious error and work towards health. That's like what a doctor does. Okay, he asks, what's wrong with you? So he starts with what's wrong and hopefully fixes that or corrects it. And then you are on your way, hopefully, towards health. Okay, the same was a mechanic. What's wrong with your car? I don't run right. Oh, well, what's it sound like? It sounds like blah, 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 blah. Okay, and then he's got to go out and then find out what's wrong with it. And his goal is a smooth running engine and perfect timing. But in order to do that, he's got to fix the wrongs. So I'm going to go with an obvious wrong. Millennial. Okay, when you deal with millennial, you put the A in front of something, it refers to the opposite, like a theist believes in God, an atheist doesn't believe in God. Okay, now an amillennial doubts the idea of 1,000 years. Okay, and they do doubt that. And then they actually believe that Satan is currently bound, okay, and he cannot prevent people from hearing the gospel. They believe that Satan was bound back at Calvary. Okay, now this one to me is quite obviously to be wrong. I mean, if Satan is bound with a chain, like it says in Revelation 20, he shorums has a longums changed. You know, I do say that he may have an ankle monitor on him, but somebody's not monitoring that ankle. Okay, and obviously this is well, I'm thinking this one's out there. I think somebody's been snorting something to come up. And of course, they approach this idea as symbolic or figurative. Now, if you approach this as symbolic or figurative, man, you could make up anything you want. So, in my mind, a millennial, we'll throw that idea right in file 13 where it belongs. Okay, now, a most popular one throughout church history is post-millennial. Okay, and what post-millennialism is, post-millennialism, it's like post-toasties or something. And one time I was talking to a fella, a friend had arranged a meal, and he said his friend was a post-millennialist, and he wanted me to talk to him. I don't know if he thought I could get to him. Okay, and so I just simply asked him, I understand that you believe in post-millennialism, and he said, yes, I do. I said, could I give you what I understand it to mean, and then you tell me if my understanding is correct. You believe that the church is going to get stronger and stronger with the power of the gospel, and during 1,000 years, and the church is actually going to, win the whole world and all that stuff. And then Christ will come back and rule. And he said, yeah, that's about it. That's what I believe. Okay, I said, let's see how we're doing. 1.5 billion Muslims. Let's see, about 1 billion Roman Catholics. 500 million Hinduists, you got Taoists and Shintoists, and you got all these different Mormons and JWs and Satanism, and Wicca. I mean, it's oh boy. I said, I don't know about that. And I said, what's it looking like to you? And he said, well, it obviously doesn't look too good. And I'm saying, yeah. A post-millennialist is thinking that the church is getting better and better and better and stronger, very similar to an evolutionist thinking the world's getting better and better and better, even though you have evidence all around you of entropy. Entropy is the simplified way of describing entropy. Entropy is your watch is running down, your batteries wear out, your car is falling apart. If an evolutionist was consistent, he'd buy his car at a junkyard, and someday it'd evolve into a Lamborghini. But unfortunately, it'd take 3 or 4 billion years to become that. I see a post-millennialist as nothing more than a Christian believing very similar to an evolutionist. It just doesn't seem to register in my mind, especially when we have examples of entropy all through the Bible, where you have the flood of Noah. Okay, man fell apart and God had to judge it. Then you got Sodom and Gomorrah, and then you got Israel. What happened to Israel? Israel fell apart, did they not? Read the end of the Old Testament. And then the Lord kind of came back and helped them out with Ezra and Nehemiah, but then right back at it, they fell apart again. And nations rise and fall, nations rise and fall. And what do you think the church is at today? It's a mess. The church of Laodicea, it's a mess. It's falling apart. Entropy. That's the prophecy of the Bible. Now, often a justification for this post-millennial viewpoint is that they're thinking that the church needs to go into the tribulation because we're having it pretty easy in America. Well, okay, I understand that idea, but the Bible is not based on America. The Bible is based on the Middle East. And Christians in the Middle East are suffering. And Christians in Muslim countries are suffering. And Christians in China are suffering. And North Korea, they are suffering. And Christians in America are suffering. It's from a different source. In many cases, it's from a narcissist or a sociopath or a psychopath as a pastor. I served under 2 pastors that were narcissists, full-fledged narcissists. Saw a lot of people suffering from their behavior. Narcissists, sociopaths, of pastors, of fathers, control freaks. I mean, you talk about a pandemic. I mean, I could, name names, people who are very close to me that are suffering terribly because they would like to have the liberty to serve God, walk with God, but a control freak for a father or an ex-husband or a husband binds them, and they're suffering. In America, you have satanic pedophiles in the media and the music and the movie and the political industries who are hiding their human trafficking the best they can, causing thousands of children to suffer. No, the church is not going into the tribulation time period, and I'll do a video on that to verify that idea. The post-millennial viewpoint, in my mind, is very illogical, and it goes against the scientific evidence of entropy. Amazing. Now, so far, I have amillennial and post-millennial. There's something they have in common with the classical premillennial. Now, the classical premillennial does believe that Christ comes back at the beginning of the millennium, but they also, and this is a foolish idea, is they believe that the church, the New Testament church, born-again believers, are going to be the focus in the millennium, the 1,000-year reign of Christ, because God has somehow transferred his promises from Israel to the church. Now, the other two, the amillennial, believe the same thing, that all the promises God gave to Israel, he must have lied to them because they've all been transferred to the church. And the post-millennial believes the same thing. The Catholic Church is promoting that idea. No, the Catholic Church believes that God transferred the promises from Israel to them. Well, in the 1800s, the Mormons showed up, Joe Smith with his fancy glasses, and they say they're the new Israel. I mean, the little Mormon young people that knock on your door, you ask them what tribe they come from, and I've heard them say time and time again, Ephraim. And then there's Pastor Russell and Pastor Russell and Judge Rutherford, or vice versa. I can't remember. Of the Jehovah Witnesses, they think they're Israel. I've had them tell me that. And then you got your skinhead Aryans. They think they're Israel, British Israelites. And now I'm actually hearing Baptists say they're Israel. The church is Israel. I mean, how insane is that? They're spelled different. They're spelled different. That's a classic premillennial. Now, the one I'm in, the one I believe, the one that I see as common sense and biblical, is the dispensational premillennial. Okay, and one of the great distinctions of the dispensational premillennial is we recognize that Israel, now this is pretty deep, Israel is Israel. And the church, the New Testament church, is the church. And they're not the same. Why? because they're spelled different. No, they're not the same. When I read Israel in the Bible, I understand it means Israel. And when I read about the church or the bride of Christ or the body of Christ, I know I'm dealing with not Israel. Now, maybe a Jew will come to Christ, but when you come to Christ as a Jew, you lose that distinction and you're placed in the body of Christ, just as a Gentile loses his Gentile race identifications with God and are placed into the body of Christ. Okay, now a premillennialist, okay, as far as the program goes, the way I understand it, the way the Bible teaches it, is a very logical system, very scientific, because we understand that entropy does take place. And since the church and the idea of the New Testament believer, or the idea of being born again, began at Calvary. That's where the opportunity to get born again began there. It wasn't understood by the apostles until Acts 15. And so this creates a whole new entity, the bride of Christ or the body of Christ. Now, the body of Christ was revealed an idea we call the rapture. The Bible calls a mystery, and it calls it a translation. Okay, where we're waiting to be translated from this kingdom to the heavenly kingdom. And then after that sonic boom takes place and a bunch of born-again believers are gone, then God can reinstitute where he stopped on Daniel's 70th week. Okay, and I'll do a video on that idea. So then it will be called Jacob's trouble, not the church's trouble. It's called Jacob's trouble. Okay, and God will finish up his plan of Daniel's 70 weeks with Israel. Then there will be Armageddon, because everything's fallen apart. That's entropy. And then when the Lord establishes his throne in Jerusalem, because he's of the lineage of David, that's what Gabriel told Mary in Luke chapter 1. The first thing he will do is have the judgment of the nations found in Matthew 25. And then he will become King of Kings and Lord of Lords. That is the greatest doctrine of the Bible. That is going to be the greatest show on earth. You don't want to miss that. That's for sure. Now, Jesus said if you're born again in John 3, you'll see it and you'll enter into it. Now, to be a part of his administration, that is conditional. But you're promised to see it and enter into it according to John chapter 3. I'm looking forward to the greatest show on earth, the utopia, when Jesus Christ is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And that would be the program as far as the chronology the Bible lays out. After that 1,000-year reign, when you read Revelation 20, the devil is unchained for a short time. He deceives a bunch of people. They have a last bang, and God wipes it out instantly, blows up the earth, blows up the heaven, and then all the righteous and unrighteous, all the unrighteous throughout history and all the righteous under the Old Testament will be in front of the white throne judgment. And then when that's done, we got a new heaven and new earth. And that's going to be the greatest of all great. So that's the viewpoint as far as, in my mind, biblical and common sense.